Hi, my name is Nathan, and what I'm going to be going over is your basic setup for whenever you want to do a drawing. This specifically is going to be setting up a title block A. Not the drawing necessarily of the title block A, but more so how to set up your formatting options. Now this title block in particular, though I have put my name on it, is a title block from another student. So it should already have all the options in there, though they may not be correct. So what I'm going to do is go through them and just look over and point out what the options should be and make corrections. So to start, we'll go over here to this formatting option. If this is not here, you can use this button right here to drop down, and it'll be the menu bar. You see it says hide for me. I can press hide and it disappears. If it's not there, you can click here and then press show menu bar. It'll show up. So we're going to go to format, and then we have different formatting options. We have layer, text style, dimension style, etc. Now this isn't the only place you can access these. You can see this is kind of the layer option here where you could mess with your layers. You have your annotations for if you wanted to change what your text style and dimension style. If I were to choose a drop down, I can now manage my text styles from here. So you can reach it in a couple of ways, but we're going to go through here. So we're going to start with the layers. We're not really going to talk about these too much because they're pretty straightforward. Basically, you'll have different layers, and each one kind of defines what this stuff on this layer means. So you're not going to use all of these in all of your drawings, but you may use some of them. For instance, down here we have a border layer drawn and a text layer. So that tells anyone that's looking at this, since this is a border and this is text, that these aren't going to be any physical object if you're going to translate this drawing into a physical object. Now if I drew something on the object layer right here, I'm telling the person looking at our drawing that this is a physical item. And if I do something on the dimension style, I'm saying, hey, this isn't a physical thing, this is just a measurement. Now the names of these are kind of decided by either your teacher or where you're working. There may be some industry standards, but for the most part, these aren't previously set, like you're always going to have a border layer, for instance. So next, we're only going to look at these three options here. The first one is color. It's pretty straightforward. It is the color of your drawing whenever you draw it on here. So if I were to draw something on the center layer, it will be red, for instance, and something on a border layer would be here 100, which is green. Next we have the line type. The line type defines what the line looks like. So for instance, you have continuous, which is a straight line, right? No emptiness in that line. And the next we have on the hidden layer, we have hidden to. Hidden to would look like a dashed line. And then we have center to, which is a long dash and then a short dash and a long dash and a short dash, etc. So this kind of defines what the line looks like. Then we have line weight. Now while you're making your drawing, line weight won't seem to be doing anything, but whenever you print your drawing, you'll notice a difference. This is simply how thick is the line whenever it's printed. Okay, so let's move on from layers. Going next down the line, we have text styles. So text styles, we're basically defining what different options are for text. Now whenever we use any kind of tool that uses text, we'll have the option to choose which one of these to format our text by. So here we only need two texts for this class. That is text 0.1 and 0.125. Now this is simply defining the height of the text. So we can see down here, we can see what the text looks like. See if I go to standard, it looks very different. That's because both of these are in Roman B font name. So make sure to choose this font. The width factor for both of these is 0.8, which is pretty straightforward. Now you may need to come in here once you have a drawing that is a different scale factor. So for instance, if I had a drawing that was a scale factor of 10, then my height would be 1.0, and then on this one it would be 1.25. Now, as for what to use these texts for, pretty much, if it is 1.25, that only goes here in your title blocks, right? So here I have my different titles. That's where I will use this 1.25. Anything, anywhere else, I will always use 0.1. Never standard, never annotative, never any of that. Just 0.1 everywhere. Okay, so I'm going to set current. That's the one that I'm using as my default. And we're going to move on. So next we have dimension style. This is probably the one that you want to pay the most attention to. It's the one you're going to be messing around with the most. Now this student already has their titles of their dimension styles, but we can kind of put them into two groupings. And we still have a standard and annotative that we're going to ignore and never use. But otherwise we have arc, or architectural, or decimal. We have 3 architectural styles and we have 5 decimal styles. So the difference between a decimal style and an architectural style is simply is how the numbers are presented. So for instance, if I have a line and the line is 1.25 in length, if I have a decimal 0, it'll simply show as a 1. If I have a decimal 1, it'll show as 1.3. If I have decimal 2, it'll show as 1.25. And if decimal 3, it'll show as 1.250. Or if you have the line that you've drawn, it might even show a 1.251 or something because you didn't draw the line with specific accuracy. Decimal 4, etc. Now for architectural, that 1.25 line will be interpreted as an architectural line, therefore a measurement. Architectural specifically is using the imperial measurement system. So that is a measurement in feet, inches, miles, that sort of thing. So in architectural, that line would be shown as 1 and 1/4. This is because the architectural settings are for fractions. Now as far as diagonal, horizontal, and non-stacked, that is simply telling us how is this fraction presented. So if we have a architectural diagonal, then the fraction will be a number, and then it'll have a sliced line here, and it'll have your other number in a diagonal shape. If it is horizontal, then you'll have your first number, you'll have your line, and you'll have your second number for that fraction. So it'll be horizontal. Not stacked is simply as if you were typing it in a line. So it would have the number, you'd have backslash, and then you'd have the other number. So all this is how is the information presented. So let's start with decimal 0. So typically whenever you're doing these, if you find that you have an incorrect setting, it's much easier to correct one of the settings completely and then to simply make new settings copying this one and then making the small changes to the new ones. So for instance, let's say that I have the way my angles are measured incorrectly. I have it set to degrees, minutes, seconds, or something like that. Now, if I had it wrong on the first one, and I copied all of these from that first one, then likely they all have it wrong. So I could either go in and change it for every single one of them, or I could change it for the first one, and then I could copy that to a new setting, and then I could just change how many decimal places it has instead. It's kind of up to you what you think would be the easier way to do that. Another important thing to mention before we move on is the fact that these settings are not saved to your complete AutoCAD like internal options or anything like that. These settings are saved to this drawing specifically. So if I were to take and make a new file completely new drawing, I would not have any of these settings. So what this means is that whenever you are starting a new drawing, you want to take your latest drawing and you want to use that, a copy of that, to make your next or new drawing. Now, this means that if your title block A, for instance, has something in it that's incorrect, and then you start with that title block A file, you make those corrections to your formatting, and then make your drawing, save it, submit it, and then your next assignment, if you're to open that title block A again, you'll have to go through and re-correct all those things you corrected last time. So it's good to keep the files or your title blocks up to date, whatever file you're going to use to start your drawing. And it's easy enough to just select your last submitted assignment, select everything inside, delete it, and then update the titles. Now let's get into actually doing these managers here. So we'll start with decimal 0. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the modify button right here. And then we have these options up here. So first we have lines, and we're not really need to worry about these old settings. So we're just going to skip right next to symbols and arrows. These define the arrows which are used here, as well as any symbols that might be used, for instance, in like a leader and center marks. Now, for the most part, you won't need to mess with these either, unless, once again, you're working with a drawing that's a different scale factor. Now, if I change my scale factor and I make a drawing that is, 10 times the size of this drawing, my arrowheads will still be the same small size. So what I would have to do is, for instance, if the scale factor was times 10, I would have to times this number by 10, and I'd get 1.8 as my arrow size. So other than that, the only other option here that's important for us to look at is center marks. So you can see here in this top right corner, we have a demonstration of what our settings would look like. Just by looking here, I can tell a couple of things. I can tell that our center mark does not have lines on. I can tell that our angles are in degrees, minutes, seconds, and I can tell that our decimal style is 0. I can also tell, for instance, that the numbers are not aligned with the dimension line. I mean, basically, there's a lot of things you can tell at a glance by looking at this top right picture. So, back to center marks. Here, if I turn this off, you can see in this circle, which we can mark the center of, there would be nothing there whenever I do a dimension. So if I were to use the dimension tool and get the radius of the circle, there would be nothing shown inside the circle. I would just get the multiliter with the radius measurement. If I have mark on, it will also put a tick mark in the center of the circle that I'm measuring. Finally, we have lines which kind of extend off of that tick mark and make it more clear that this is the circle we're measuring. So typically, for our default, we want to have line on for these center marks. So now we're going to move on to text. Just take a drink of water here. Okay, text. Now, text, first thing you're going to notice is we have text style. Now, this is 0.1 as it should be. Everything you define in these formattings should be 0.1. That's because since none of this is going into the title block, by a title block I mean this titling here, that means that everything is going to be 0.1 for all of these. So this is correct. Text color by block, which is what we want. That means that depending on what line or what layer I'm on, that will be the color of the text. So we don't really need to worry about any of this stuff. Now, if you had scale factor, you would not want to change any kind of text height options here. I'm not even sure if it will let you. You would change that in your text formatting. Now, text placement and text alignment. These are important because these are going to affect your grade depending on if you have the correct option or not. So with text placement, we have vertical, horizontal, and view direction. So view direction, you're not going to have to necessarily mess with. It's just going to flip all your numbers upside down. So don't worry about that one. Don't worry about the offset from the dimension line either. What we want to look at mostly is the vertical placement, right? So the vertical placement, if we looked here, we have a number and then we have the line, right? So this is centered. This is telling me this line, or this number, is going to be centered in between this line. Now I could put above, and you see it changes it so that the number is above the line. Now if you look on these other two options here, you can see that they're still in between, and that's because these lines, this is a completely horizontal line, this is a vertical line, this is a diagonal line. That's why they have three. So any horizontal lines, this is what it would look like, but the vertical line will still be in the center, or the diagonal line will still be in the center. Now you may have different dimensions on your assignment where the number is changed from centered to above. Now it's important for you to make those changes because it will affect how that is graded. Mostly you're going to be using those two. We do have outside, which you can change to put every number outside, but you won't typically see this. And below as well, which you also typically won't see. It might show up, but for the most part it's going to be either centered or above. Horizontal, you can see, has some similar options. We have centered, we have add extension line 1 and add extension line 2, and you can see that's just defining, is it going to the left side or is it going to the right side? It kind of depends on where you started your line. And then we have over, which puts it over this. As far as in this class goes, you will never see that. So for the most part, centered is going to be what you would use for horizontal. Next, we have text alignment. So as you can see right now, text alignment is set to horizontal. So that means that reading from left to right, if I were to put lines under these numbers, they would all line up directly underneath, no problem. But if I change it here to align with dimension line, if you pay attention specifically to this number and this number, you can see that they've changed to align with this. You're going to be seeing this a lot, so there will be many times we'll have to change from horizontal to aligned with dimension line. It's important to understand that getting your dimensions right is just as much a part of the grade as drawing the drawing right. Okay, so let's move on to the fit. So you have different fit options. If they're pretty self-explanatory, they define it here. If there isn't enough room to place both the text and the arrows inside the extension lines, the first thing to move outside of these lines will be, and you can see as I change, you can see that I'm changing, well, I guess it's not showing on these, but it would change whether or not, for instance, if this was too squished, what would go off to the side first? Would it be the number or would it be the arrows, for instance? You'll have to look at your drawing to see which of these you'll have to do. You can also see that whenever the text is not in the default position, you can change where it would go to. For instance, if this was squished and you chose that the text was to move outside of the dimensions lines, that's where you'd see this. But once again, you'll have to look at your specific drawing. Scale for dimension features. You see there's the use overall scale of here. You might need to change this if you have a drawing that has a scale factor. Next we have fine tuning. Now these aren't options you particularly have to worry about, but for me in particular, I like to use placed text manually. And the reason I like to use this is because you'll click and then you'll click for your other line, right? And then you'll have your dimension tool, right? So I can give a small demonstration. We're using decimal 0, and let's make sure we're on decimal 0 here, right? So if I give us a line here, and I use the dimension tool, since fine tuning is on, you can see that where my mouse is deciding where the number is going to be placed. This can be very useful for certain assignments to match where the text is placed exactly. That's why I like having this on. It's because if an assignment doesn't have any special options and it's just centered, I can simply just aim for the center and click and put it there. Or if it's off to the side, I could do it like that. It gives me a lot of control. Okay, back to our dimension style. So that's it for fit. Now we're going to move to primary units. This option here, primary units, is what defines the differences between the options that we have. These are all different only here in the primary units. For everything else, all of those settings, they're likely the same. So this is, first we'll start with linear dimensions. That just means the dimensions whenever we're taking measurements of lines. You can see this is decimal. So here we have different options, but we're only using decimal and architectural, which is these architectural here. The decimal is simply saying, hey, we're using the decimal system whenever we're doing the lines. We're saying that if we measure a line that's 1.5 feet, it's going to be 1.5. Architectural, as I said before, we'll be using the fraction system. So next we have the precision, right? So this is decimal 0. These have been named very clearly. How many decimal points are we checking for? So for 0, we're checking for 0 decimal places, so it will be 0. For 1, it would be 1. 2, it'd be 2 decimal places, and so on up to 4. Now, we don't need to worry about any of these other options. You might need to worry about scale factor depending on your drawing. Next, we have zero suppression. So we have leading and trailing. So let's say you have something that is, if you have 0, 0, 1, that'd be leading zeros. And if you had 1.00, that'd be trailing zeros. Well, since we're setting specifically our precision, you don't want to have either of these options on. No zero suppression. So this is linear for lines. Next we have angular dimensions, right? And that's whenever we're measuring angles. So since this is a decimal style, what we want to do is we want to change to decimal degrees. Now this is a decimal 0, so we want to make sure that we have 0 decimal places. And then once again, no zero suppression. Then we have these other two options, which you don't need to worry about, are alternate units and tolerances. Don't worry about either of these. Okay, so now that we've set up our decimal 0, we've made corrections. We could either go through that exact same process 4 more times, or we could simply select these and we can just get rid of these. So we'll delete all of those. And we'll select decimal 0, have it highlighted, and press new. So instead of copy of decimal 0, we're going to call this decimal 1. We're going to start with decimal 0, and we're going to continue. It'll automatically open up what changes we want to make. And all we want to change is the primary units. Now, this is all you have to do. You go to precision, you change it to 1, and you do the same for angles, for angular dimensions. Then you press OK, and that's it. Right? So now we can do the same thing. We can select either one of these, it doesn't matter which one, and then we can do a new, start with, this was going to be decimal 2. We'll change this one to 2 decimal places. So as we can see, it's very, very simple to make these other options. Start with decimal 2. And after you get the first one initially set up, it should really only take you just a few seconds to set up the others. Okay, so next we have the architectural ones. So I'm going to start with architectural diagonal. Now since I told you the only thing that changes is the primary units, I don't want to go back through and set up all of these again, right? So what I will do is I will just start with decimal 0, and I will delete arc diagonal, select decimal 0, new, start with a copy of decimal 0, arc diagonal, continue. change the unit format to architectural. And then next we have the precision. So this kind of depends on the assignment, what the precision will be for architectural. Basically you're choosing how far down the fractions would you go. Would you have no fractions? Would you go only a maximum a half, fourth, eighth, 16th? This really depends on the drawing that you're doing. I'm just going to choose 1/2 because I need to see at least a fraction to understand what I'm doing. So next is very simple. Arc diagonal, fraction format, right? Horizontal, diagonal, not stacked, right? Very, very simple. You'll just choose diagonal. I can leave this as decimal degrees, or perhaps this I might want to have as degrees, minutes, seconds. So I'm just going to choose just a standard DMS. And once again, the architectural is more specific to your assignment, what these should be. But the important thing is that all you would be changing is this up here, the unit format, precision, fraction format, and the unit format and precision of the angular dimensions as well. So I'm not going to go through and do that again for horizontal and not stacked, because I figure you probably get the point by now. So that's how you set up all of your formatting, and I believe that's all we need to talk about. I guess there's still multi-leader style, which is pretty straightforward. I guess I can go through that right quick. So we'll make a new multi-leader. It's using the multi-leader tool, which you can see right here. And we'll just call it multi-leader, and we'll call it 3. So let's see, by block, all of that we want the same. And this is similar to the dimension style. You know, the arrowhead, what does the arrowhead look like, what is the size of it, that kind of thing. Leader structure. So this is maximum number of leader points. So basically you have your leader points, and then once you finish your leader points, there'll be what's called a landing. So you will have, for instance, this is multi-leader 3. So we're going to move up to 3 leader points. Content, we're going to change the text style to 0.1. And that is probably good enough. Press OK. Multi-leader 3, set current, close. Let's draw a leader. So first I specify the first location. I'll just click anywhere. Let me turn off ortho. And I'm going to click somewhere else, and then click somewhere else like this. So this is a multi-leader 3. There are 3 multi-leader points. The important thing is that the multi-leader points include the initial point. So it's not 1, 2, 3. This is 0.1. This is 0.2. This is 0.3. And this line will always be horizontal. It's called a landing. So whenever you finish, it'll create this landing, and then it'll put the multi-text box at the end of it where you can type out whatever you need to type out. So you can change your format, multi-leader style. You can basically, new copy of multi-leader 3, you can basically change the amount of turns your multi-leader has by controlling this multi-leader points. I don't think you'll ever see anything higher than 3, so it's either going to be 2 or 3. So you might want to set those up. Okay, I believe that is probably enough as far as setting up the formatting. As far as the title block goes, you already know that the title block should be, let's change our annotation to decimal 2, 7.5, 10. And yeah, I guess that'll be all for now. Alright, thank you for watching.